All right, now another word for sole ownership, and they love this. This is a vocabulary word that they throw out all the time, kind of like that per entre B thing. They love to throw this at everybody. Severalty. All right, now the reason why they love to throw that word out at everybody is because if you read the word severalty, it can be kind of confusing because if you look at the word, automatically you think it's several. Well, it's actually two words broken down. And the actual way you say this is severalty. So it's like two different words. So there should actually be a hyphen right here. So the actual word means, sever means to separate, okay? And ality, that's an actual Latin word that means others. All right, so basically what that word means is separate from others. So if you ever own a property by yourself, yeah, it's called sole ownership. However, they're always going to use the word severalty, which basically means separate from others. All right. All right, so the next one that we're going to go through is the different types of ownership that we can have under co-ownership. So the first one that we're going to talk about is tenancy in common, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and erase this. Kind of give you an idea how this works. All right, now co-ownership. Co in Latin just means together, okay? So you're basically owning things together. Oops. There we go. All right, now the first one that we're going to talk about is tenancy in common. All right, now this is going to help us out tremendously to understand what the actual word tenancy in common means. Now remember yesterday we were talking, tenancy doesn't really mean a lease, right? It doesn't mean a rental or something of that nature. Remember that tenancy stems off the word tenio, which means to hold, okay, to hold. And then common means by shares. So basically what the word means is to hold by shares. All right, so we're going to make this pretty basic. I'm only going to use two parties. All right, so let's say, for instance, we have A and B. All right, now B owns 25%, or A owns 25%, B owns 75%, okay? All right, so under tenancy in common, one of the biggest distinction is, unequal shares. Did you guys see that one? Unequal shares. So if you ever get a question, A owns 25%, B owns 75%, how do they hold? Well, there's only one way you can hold it. Why? Because it's unequal, right? So it'd be tenancy in common. Now, on your exam, they love to abbreviate everything. If you guys haven't noticed that, they abbreviate, they'll abbreviate anything and everything if they can. So another name for tenancy in common is a TIC. All right, so if you ever see the word, abbreviation TIC, that's what they're referring to. All right, now, the cool thing about tenancy in common is unequal shares. That's your first indicator. All right, the second thing is under tenancy in common, what can you do? You can will it. So if you ever get a question, A and B want to hold title, but A wants to be able to will their property. How would you hold it? Tenancy in common, right? Because it's unequal and they can will their shares. Another one is they can mortgage their share. You could also trade your share. Basically, the bottom line is you can do whatever you want with the share that you hold. All right, does anybody have any questions about that? On that sheet of paper I sent you, it breaks it down pretty good and what you can and can't do, and kind of gives you categories of how it works. All right, cool. All right, so the second one that we're going to talk about is a little bit different, and this one's pretty highly tested on. So I kind of want to go through a couple of questions and so forth that they may ask. And this one is called joint tenancy. All right, joint tenancy. All right, now joint tenancy is a little bit different, okay? Now, what does the word joint mean? Well, it means to combine. So that's a little bit different than buy shares, right? So they're combined. Tenancy is to hold, right? So to hold combined is what that means. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go down to the two parties again. We got A again, and we got B. And under joint tenancy, since you're combined, this is a little bit different. You have to have equal shares. It's almost the opposite of tenancy in common. So A has to have 50% and B has to have 50%, right? Now, it does not matter how many parties are under a joint tenancy. You can have 100 parties as long as they have what? Equal shares. All right, now another name for joint tenancy. Now remember, they abbreviated everything, so what do you think they're going to call it? JT, right? JT, that's what they call it. All right, however, they're also going to call it another name here that we're going to find out in just 1 second and why they're going to call it. But I want to show you guys what the difference is here. So automatically we have to have equal shares. So under tenancy in common, we can have unequal, right? So the distinction here is equal. Okay, equal shares. All right, now another thing when it comes to joint tenancy is no will. It's kind of the opposite of tenancy in common, right? So it's no will. So basically you can't will your half off to whoever you want. So why is that? The reason is because this is a key word that you guys want to remember. Joint tenancy has what is called the right of survivorship. Okay? So if you ever get a question, what type of ownership has the right of survivorship, is automatically joint tenancy. All right, so what in the world does right of survivorship mean? What that means is if A dies, B gets it all. That's what right of survivorship means, right? Last man standing, per se. All right, now another thing is joint tenancy. You go on one deed, okay? So everybody goes on one deed because why? You're combined. Another thing about joint tenancy is since you have the right of survivorship, guess what else you don't have to go to? Probate. Now remember, if you die with a will or you die without a will, you're probably going to go to probate to prove, right? That's what the word probate means. So if I already have a designated spot for the property to go, guess where you don't have to go? Probate. So the good thing about it is no probate. All right, now that leads us to the other name of joint tenancy. And I've seen this probably 5 or 6 times on an exam. Another name for joint tenancy is going to be, I hope everybody can see this, a poor man's will. Okay? So it's basically a poor man's will because joint tenancy, there's no probate, so there's no expensive probate, correct? So what happens is once A dies, B gets it all, and it just transfers right over. Basically, you have to sign an affidavit, you know, obviously show a death certificate and so forth, but it's nothing to do with having to spend it for an attorney and go through court systems and everything else. It's already got a place to go. All right, now, another thing about joint tenancy is to remember, it also supersedes a will. Okay, so if you ever get a question, A and B are in joint tenancy. A writes a will. Where does the property go upon death? A will does not matter. It automatically goes to A because it always supersedes a will. All right, now another question when it comes to joint tenancy. Let's say, for instance, A wants to will their half to their son, but since they're in a joint tenancy, it supersedes a will, right? So they can't do it. So let's say, for instance, A walks over to B and says, you know what, B, I really want out of this joint tenancy because I want to be able to will my 50% to my son. And B goes, yeah, all right, that's cool. Makes sense to me because I want to be able to will my half to my son too. So let's go ahead and break the joint tenancy. If they break the joint tenancy, what is the default? So what does it automatically go into? If the joint tenancy is no longer in existence, what does it go into? I'll give you guys a second to put it in the chat box. There it is. Woohoo! Yep, that's exactly right, everybody. It automatically goes into a tick, right? Remember, tenants in common. That's the default ownership. That's exactly right. So once they come out of a joint tenancy, since there's 2 parties, right, you're still under a co-ownership. It's just the form of co-ownership that now you'll be able to will it. So if you're able to will it, it automatically defaults to the tenancy in common. Very good, you guys. All right, let's give you one more. That's a very popular question. All right, now let's say, for instance, A dies. B gets it all. So B has 100% ownership. All right. So if it started off in a joint tenancy, A dies and B gets 100%. How does B now hold the title? I'll give you guys a second to answer that one. Go ahead and throw it in the chat box. Very good, you guys. Absolutely. So what happens is, yeah, it started off in a joint tenancy. However, since A died, B has it all. There's only one way that he can own it, right? Sole ownership or severalty. Very good, because he has 100%. All right, last but not least, when it comes to joint tenancy, which is a very popular question, is there's actually 4 unities that you have to make a joint tenancy, okay? And the best way to remember this, and I love acronyms, because if it spells out the acronym, you got the right answer, okay? So let's see here. Where am I going to put this so everybody can see it? I'm going to go over to this side over here and start erasing a little bit. All right, so you have to have PITT, all right? So to make a joint tenancy, you have to have 4 unities. And the 4 unities basically spell PIT. What does PIT mean? You have to have possession, which means ownership. You have to have interest. Remember, the same interest, 50-50. You also have to have time. You all acquire the property at the same time. And then what happens? You also go on the same title. Remember, one deed. So PITT are the 4 unities that are required to make a joint tenancy. All right, so does anybody have any questions on that? I gave you all the questions and answers they could possibly ask you on your exam about this. If you guys want to take a picture of that, let me know. I'll get out of your way. And it's also on the other separate piece of paper that I sent you in the other supplemental documents as well. Is everybody okay? Go ahead and throw it in the chat. All right, good deal. All right, cool. All right, good stuff. All right. All right, so what we'll do is we'll head back on over to share mode, and we'll pick up where we left off. All right, good deal. All right, so we left off on 84, and that's basically what joint tenancy is, right? So joint tenancy just means combined, to hold combined. So a joint tenancy may be severed by conveying it to another party. Severed means separated. So if A decides to sell it to somebody else, they have to have B's permission though, okay? So once B gives permission to sell it, they sell it to somebody else. Or if they want to gift it to somebody, you can actually give your property away if you wanted to. Or a gift is also, quote unquote, how about in a will, right? Because you're giving it. So basically, if you sell it or gift it, that would automatically go to what? Tenancy in common, okay? So the most distinguishing characteristic of tenancy in common is, remember this, right of survivorship at all times. Last man standing. All right, so good stuff, you guys. So we'll head on down to property evaluation and financial analysis. All right, now property evaluation is basically appraisals, right? More than likely, a bank is going to want to have an appraisal done before they give you a loan, because they want to make sure the collateral is what it is, of course. And basically what an appraisal means, the actual Latin word for appraisal means value. So they're always trying to come up with a value of property before they give a loan or refinance, whatever the case may be. So we're going to go over the different ways that they do that and what that's all about. On the supplemental piece of paper I sent y'all, I gave you the cost approach and how to break it down on the math section as well. So, and the depreciation and everything. So that should be, those are the most popular questions that they ask as well. So you guys are in good shape. All right, so if you hop on number 1, appraisal may be oral or written means. More than likely, what do you always want to do? Put it in writing, right? Because an appraisal does mean value. All right, number 2, according to the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practices, that's called USPAP. Know that abbreviation. Members cannot base their fee on a percentage of final estimate of value and must disclose any interest in the property being appraised. All right, so